The year was 1843. Like a verdant ocean, the Alabama wilderness stretched out, teeming with pine and oak, creek and hollow. It was a land still holding tight to its secrets, still being tamed by human hands. Among the rolling hills and red clay soil stood Fairchild Manor, a stately home belonging to one of Marengo County's most respected families. Nearly 2 decades prior, the Fairchilds had arrived when Alabama was still finding its footing as the 22nd state of the Union. From Virginia, Thomas Fairchild, a man of considerable means and ambition, had brought his young bride, Eliza, to establish what he promised would be a dynasty. The land was fertile, the timber plentiful, and as abundantly as the cotton that would soon blanket their fields, opportunity seemed to grow. By 1843, throughout the county, the Fairchild name carried weight. 3 children had blessed Thomas and Eliza. William, their eldest son, now 21 and studying to become a physician. Mary, their 17-year-old daughter, known for her quick wit and beauty, and young James, barely 10, a curious boy with an imagination as vast as the Alabama sky. Under Thomas's careful management, the family's cotton plantation prospered, and their home, while not the grandest in the state, spoke of a taste and refinement that set them apart from many of their neighbors. 2 stories tall stood the manor house itself, its white columns gleaming in the southern sun. Offering respite from the oppressive summer heat was its wide veranda. Inside, an atmosphere of gentle comfort was created by polished wooden floors and elegant furnishings. Thomas took particular pride in certain luxuries he had acquired. Chief among them was a collection of mirrors imported from Europe, their glass flawlessly clear, their frames ornately carved. The walls of the main parlor, the dining room, and the master bedroom were adorned by these looking glasses, bringing light and a sense of spaciousness to rooms that might otherwise feel closed in by the dense forest surrounding the property. These mirrors would become the focal point of the events that began to unfold in the spring of 1843. Events so utterly inexplicable, so strange, that they would forever alter the fabric of the Fairchild family. Our tale truly begins on the 15th of April, a day that dawned like any other at Fairchild Manor. The sweet scent of magnolia blossoms carried on the air, and bird song filled the early morning hours. Gradually, the household stirred to life, as it always did. First the servants, then Thomas and Eliza, followed by the children. Often the last to rise was Mary Fairchild, cherishing those extra moments of slumber before facing the day's duties and lessons. On this particular morning, however, she woke earlier than usual, disturbed by a dream she could not quite recall. Something about faces or perhaps masks. Like water through fingers, the details slipped away as consciousness fully claimed her. With a sigh, over the edge of the bed she swung her legs, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. Casting the room in a pale, ethereal glow, the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains. To her dressing table Mary moved where a silver-backed hand mirror lay alongside her hairbrush and combs. She lifted the mirror, intending to assess the damage that sleep had done to her dark curls. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Her own was the face looking back at her, and yet not her own. The features were correct, the same heart-shaped face, the same deep brown eyes, the same full lips. But foreign seemed a certain quality to the gaze, something in the expression. Slightly to the right Mary tilted her head, to the left her reflection tilted. Mary gasped and dropped the mirror onto the soft rug beneath her feet. Rapidly she blinked, her heart pounding against her ribs. Surely, it had been a trick of the light, or perhaps some remnant of her troubling dream, still clinging to her consciousness. After a moment to collect herself, she bent down and retrieved the mirror, relieved to find it unbroken. This time when she gazed into it, her reflection behaved as it should, mimicking her movements precisely. Softly Mary laughed at her own foolishness. "You silly girl," she whispered to herself, "letting your imagination run away with you." She placed the mirror back on the dressing table and began preparing for the day ahead, selecting a pale blue day dress from her armoire, brushing out her hair. From her thoughts, the incident with the mirror soon faded, replaced by anticipation of breakfast and plans to work on her embroidery in the garden if the weather held. It wasn't until she was descending the main staircase that another strange occurrence gave her pause. As she passed the large gilt-framed mirror that hung in the entrance hall, another of her father's prized possessions, she caught a glimpse of movement that seemed out of sync with her own. Abruptly she stopped and turned to face the mirror fully. Again, her reflection appeared normal, but as she stood motionless, studying herself, she could have sworn she saw her reflected lips curl into a smile before her own did. So brief, so subtle was the moment that Mary immediately doubted her own perception. "Mary, are you quite well?" Her mother's voice startled her. At the bottom of the stairs stood Eliza Fairchild, her brow furrowed with concern. A handsome woman in her early 40s, her once golden hair now streaked with silver, but her carriage still regal, her manner always composed. "Yes, Mother, I'm perfectly fine. Just lost in thought, I suppose." "Well, do come along. Your father is waiting, and you know how he detests tardiness at breakfast." Mary nodded and continued down the stairs, resisting the urge to glance back at the mirror. As she followed her mother into the dining room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, that some fundamental rule of nature had been momentarily suspended. At the breakfast table, at the head sat Thomas Fairchild, already perusing the latest newspaper that had arrived from Mobile. To his right sat William, immersed in a medical text, occasionally jotting notes in the margins. Young James was using his fork to arrange his eggs into what appeared to be a battlefield, complete with toe soldiers. "James, that is not how a gentleman behaves at table," Eliza admonished gently as she took her seat. The boy sighed and began eating properly, though his eyes still gleamed with imagination. "I was just recreating the Battle of Horseshoe Bend," he explained. "Mr. Peterson told us about it yesterday during our history lesson." Slightly Thomas lowered his newspaper. "That was nearly 30 years ago, son. And while it's good to know our state's history, the breakfast table is not the place for warfare, imagined or otherwise." "Yes, sir," James replied, properly chastened. Mary took her place and unfolded her napkin across her lap, trying to focus on the normality of the family gathering. Yet, she found her gaze drawn to the ornate mirror that hung on the dining room wall, positioned so that Thomas could observe the entire room without turning his head. In its reflection, the family looked exactly as they should, her father stern but fair, her mother elegant and watchful, William scholarly, James barely containing his youthful energy. And yet there was something about the expressions, something in the quality of the light reflected there, that seemed slightly off, as though she were seeing not her actual family, but skilled actors playing their parts. Mary blinked and looked away, disturbed by her own fanciful thoughts. "Mary, you've scarcely touched your food," Eliza noted after several minutes had passed. "Are you feeling unwell?" Before Mary could respond, William spoke up, not looking up from his book. "She's likely still exhausted from the Montgomery spring ball." "You did dance every set, sister." "The ball was 3 days ago," Mary protested. "I've quite recovered." Thomas folded his newspaper and set it aside. "Perhaps it's the changing season. Spring fevers are common enough. Mary, if you're feeling poorly, you should rest today instead of your usual activities." "I'm not ill, father." Truly, Mary forced herself to take a bite of toast, though she had little appetite. "I simply didn't sleep well." "Bad dreams?" James asked, his eyes widening with interest. "I had one where all the frogs from the pond came into my room and started singing like a church choir." This prompted laughter around the table, breaking the tension Mary hadn't realized was building. To the day's plans, the conversation shifted. Thomas had business in town. William would continue his studies. Eliza would meet with the housekeeper about spring cleaning, and James had lessons with his tutor. Mary was expected to practice her piano in the morning and work on her French translation in the afternoon. As the family dispersed after breakfast, Mary found herself lingering in the dining room, her eyes once again drawn to the mirror. When she was certain she was alone, she approached it slowly, studying her reflection. Everything appeared normal, her dark curls pinned neatly, her blue dress complementing her fair complexion, her expression one of uncertainty. "This is absurd," she whispered to herself. "Mirrors cannot behave strangely. They simply show what is before them." As if in response to her words, her reflection's eyes seemed to widen slightly before her own did. Mary gasped and stepped back, her heart racing. Tightly she closed her eyes, counted to 10, and looked again. Her reflection was exactly as it should be, mimicking her every movement with perfect precision. Quickly Mary left the dining room, deciding that perhaps her father was right. Maybe she was coming down with something, a fever that was causing her mind to play tricks on her. She would focus on her piano practice and put these strange fancies out of her head. The morning passed uneventfully. Mary played her scales and worked diligently on the Beethoven sonata her music teacher had assigned. The familiar routine was comforting, and by midday, the incident with the mirror seemed like nothing more than an odd flight of imagination. After luncheon, as Mary was making her way to the small library to work on her French translation, she encountered her brother, William, in the corridor. He was standing before another of the house's many mirrors, this one, a tall, narrow-looking glass in a simple mahogany frame. "William," Mary called, approaching him. "Are you well?" Her brother didn't respond immediately. He was staring at his reflection with an intensity that Mary found unsettling. His right hand was raised, fingers spread wide, while his left remained at his side. In the mirror, both of his hands were raised. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. "William," she said more forcefully. He turned to her, blinking as though waking from a dream. "Oh, Mary." "Yes, what is it? What were you doing just now?" William glanced back at the mirror where his reflection now matched his movements perfectly. Studying the muscular structure of the hand, he said smoothly. "Part of my anatomy lessons." "But your reflection," Mary began, then stopped herself. What could she say that wouldn't sound utterly mad? William raised an eyebrow. "My reflection? What?" "Nothing. I was mistaken." Mary forced a smile. "Don't let me interrupt your studies." As she continued to the library, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with her brother. William had always been serious and studious, but there had been something almost mechanical in his manner just now, something cold in his eyes that was most unlike him. In the library, Mary tried to concentrate on translating passages from Les Miserables, but her thoughts kept returning to the strange incidents with the mirrors and now William's odd behavior. She found herself glancing nervously at the small mirror that hung above the library fireplace, half expecting to see her reflection acting independently. When James burst into the library an hour later, Mary nearly jumped out of her skin. "Mary, Mary," the boy exclaimed, his face alight with excitement. The most wonderful thing happened. "James, you startled me," Mary said, placing a hand over her racing heart. "What's got you so animated?" "The mirror in Father's study," James said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It showed me things." Mary felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "What things?" James glanced around as though checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned closer to his sister. "I was looking for my toy soldier that went missing. I thought perhaps Sally had put it in Father's study when she was cleaning, and I saw myself in Father's big mirror. But I wasn't just standing there. I was opening Father's desk drawer and finding my soldier." "And did you?" Mary asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Did you find your soldier in the drawer?" James nodded enthusiastically. "Right where the mirror showed me. Isn't that marvelous? It's like the mirror can see things before they happen." Or perhaps, Mary thought with growing unease, the reflection had acted independently, and James had simply followed what he saw. The thought was too disturbing to voice. "James, I want you to promise me something," she said, taking her brother's small hands in hers. "I want you to stay away from the mirrors in the house today. All of them. Can you do that?" James's smile faded. "But why?" "They're helping me. Please, James, just for today. As a favor to me." The boy studied his sister's face, sensing her distress. "Are you afraid of the mirrors, Mary?" Was she? The question gave her pause. "Not afraid exactly, just concerned." Will you promise? After a moment, James nodded. I promise, but only for today. Thank you. Mary squeezed his hands gratefully. Now, shouldn't you be with Mr. Peterson for your mathematics lesson? James groaned. I suppose, though I'd much rather explore the mystery of the helpful mirrors. After her brother left, Mary sat motionless in her chair, her French translation forgotten. 3 incidents now, her own experience at dawn, William's strange behavior, and now James's helpful mirror. Something was happening in Fairchild Manor, something that defied rational explanation. Mary had always prided herself on her logical mind, on not being susceptible to the superstitions that many in Alabama still clung to. But what was happening now tested the boundaries of her understanding. She needed to speak with someone to determine whether she was simply imagining things or if there was genuine cause for alarm. Her mother would be the most understanding, Mary decided. Eliza Fairchild was a practical woman, but she was also intuitive and open-minded. If anyone would listen without immediately dismissing Mary's concerns, it would be her. Mary found her mother in the sewing room, supervising the mending of linens. Eliza looked up when her daughter entered, immediately noting Mary's troubled expression. Sally, that will be all for now, Eliza said to the young servant girl who was carefully stitching a pillowcase. Continue with these after you've helped Mrs. Powell prepare for dinner. Yes, Sally replied, setting her work aside and curtsying before she left the room. When they were alone, Eliza patted the chair beside her. Come, Mary. Something's troubling you. I've noticed it since breakfast. Mary sat down, uncertain how to begin. Mother, have you noticed anything unusual about the mirrors in our house? Eliza's brow furrowed slightly. The mirrors? No. Nothing particular comes to mind. Why do you ask? It sounds foolish when I try to put it into words, Mary admitted. But this morning, I thought I saw my reflection move differently than I did, just for a moment. And then I saw William standing before the mirror in the hallway, and his reflection wasn't matching his movements. Instead of dismissing her daughter's words, Eliza's expression grew thoughtful. And was there anything else? Mary related James's story about the mirror showing him where to find his toy soldier. As she spoke, she watched her mother's face carefully, looking for signs of disbelief or concern. To her surprise, Eliza seemed more intrigued than alarmed. The dawn, Eliza murmured when Mary had finished. You said the first incident happened at dawn. Yes, just as the sun was rising. Why does that mean something to you? Eliza rose and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where spring flowers were blooming in carefully tended beds. There's an old story, she said slowly. Something my grandmother told me when I was about James's age. About mirrors and dawnlight and doorways. Doorways, Mary repeated, standing to join her mother at the window. To another place, another world perhaps that exists alongside our own, but reversed. My grandmother called it the world behind the glass. Eliza turned to face her daughter. I always thought it was just a story meant to frighten children into being careful around mirrors, which were much more valuable and fragile in her day. And now? Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I'm not certain. Eliza's hand moved to touch the cameo brooch she always wore, a gift from Thomas on their wedding day. There have been moments, little things I've dismissed. A gesture in the mirror that seemed to precede my own. An expression I didn't recognize as mine. She shook her head. I told myself it was just a trick of the light or my eyes playing tricks as I grow older. Mary felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that she wasn't alone in her experiences, dread at what it might mean if even her practical mother was noticing these anomalies. What did your grandmother say about these doorways? Can they be closed? Eliza sighed. I don't recall the details. It was so long ago, and as I said, I never took it seriously. But I believe there was something about a specific dawn, perhaps the equinox or solstice, when the barrier between our world and the mirror world is at its thinnest. The spring equinox, Mary said, a realization dawning on her. That was last month on March 20th. Yes, That's right, Eliza looked troubled now. About 3 weeks ago, and father received that new mirror for his study just after that, didn't he? The one from that merchant in Mobile. Eliza nodded slowly. Mr. Yes, Thomas was quite pleased with it. Said it was older than the others. 18th century at least. French, he believed. A chill ran through Mary despite the warm spring air coming through the window. Mother, do you think, could something have come through from this world behind the glass? Before Eliza could answer, the door to the sewing room opened and Thomas Fairchild entered. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, his dark hair just beginning to grey at the temples. Mary had always thought him handsome in a stern way, though his features rarely softened into a full smile. "Ah, here are my ladies," he said, his voice resonant in the small room. "I've just returned from town and thought I'd look in on you before attending to some correspondence." "How was your business, Thomas?" Eliza asked, her voice betraying nothing of their previous conversation. "Productive. The new shipment of goods has arrived at the general store, including those books you ordered, Mary." Thomas's gaze shifted to his daughter. "Mr. Calloway says they're quite popular in New York and Boston. Gothic novels, I believe." Under normal circumstances, Mary would have been delighted. She had been waiting weeks for the books to arrive. Now, however, she found it difficult to summon enthusiasm. "Thank you, Father. That was most thoughtful." Thomas studied her face. "You're still looking peaked, daughter. Perhaps you should lie down before dinner." "I'm fine, truly," Mary insisted. "Just preoccupied with my translation work. Victor Hugo's prose can be quite challenging." Thomas seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Well, don't strain yourself. A young lady's constitution isn't built for excessive intellectual rigor." He turned to Eliza. "I'll be in my study if I'm needed. And Eliza, I'd like to speak with you this evening about the arrangements for the governor's visit next month. We'll need to prepare the guest rooms." After he left, Mary and Eliza exchanged glances. "Did you notice anything different about him?" Mary asked quietly. Eliza hesitated. "He seemed perhaps a bit more formal than usual. But your father has always been reserved, especially when his mind is on business matters. Should we tell him about the mirrors?" "Not yet," Eliza decided after a moment's consideration. "Not until we understand more about what's happening. Thomas is a rational man. He would likely dismiss our concerns as feminine fancy." Mary couldn't argue with that assessment. Her father, while loving in his way, had little patience for anything that couldn't be logically explained or practically addressed. "What should we do then?" Mary asked. "For now, we observe," Eliza said firmly. "We pay attention to the mirrors and to any changes in behavior among the household, and I'll try to remember more of my grandmother's story. Perhaps there was something about how to close these doorways, if indeed they've been opened." Mary nodded, feeling slightly better for having a plan, however tentative. "Should we warn James? And what about William?" "Let me speak with James," Eliza decided. "As for William, let's watch him carefully. If he truly is experiencing the same phenomena we are, he may come to us himself." The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Mary completed her French translation, though her concentration was poor. She found herself avoiding the library mirror, positioning herself so that it wasn't in her line of sight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manor grounds, the household prepared for dinner. It was a ritual as familiar as breathing, washing up, changing into evening attire, gathering in the parlor for conversation before the meal was served. Mary selected a gown of deep green silk, one of her favorites. As her maid Bess helped her dress, Mary deliberately kept her eyes away from the mirror on her dressing table. "You look lovely, Miss Mary," Bess commented as she fastened the last button. "That color brings out your eyes something wonderful." "Thank you, Bess." Mary hesitated, then asked, "Have you noticed anything unusual about the mirrors in the house lately?" Bess, a young woman not much older than Mary herself, tilted her head thoughtfully. Can't say as I have, miss. Though Sally did mention something curious yesterday, said she saw Miss Eliza walking down the upstairs hallway while she was dusting. But when she went to greet her, there wasn't nobody there. Sally thought maybe she'd imagined it or seen a shadow or a reflection without its source. Mary thought with growing unease. If you or the other servants notice anything strange, anything at all, would you let me know? Mary asked. It would be a great help. Of course, Miss Mary. Bess looked concerned. Is everything all right? I'm sure it is, Mary lied. Just a small matter I'm looking into. When Mary entered the parlor, she found her father and William already engaged in conversation about some medical case William had been studying. James sat nearby, unusually quiet, his small face solemn as he watched his father and eldest brother talk. Ah, Mary, Thomas acknowledged her entrance with a nod. You're looking better this evening. Some color has returned to your cheeks. Thank you, father. Mary took a seat near James, giving him a questioning look. The boy shook his head slightly, indicating he hadn't broken his promise about the mirrors. William was just telling me about an interesting case of memory loss his professor discussed, Thomas continued. Quite remarkable how injury to certain parts of the brain can alter a person's entire behavior. Indeed, William agreed, his voice oddly flat. The patient began acting so differently that his own family claimed he was an imposter. Mary felt her breath catch. What happened to him? William's gaze met hers, and for a moment, Mary thought she saw something alien in her brother's eyes, something calculating and cold. He never recovered his former personality. The family eventually had to accept that he was fundamentally changed. How dreadful, Mary murmured. Not necessarily, William replied. The new version of the man was by some accounts more efficient and logical, less burdened by sentimentality. Thomas chuckled. That doesn't sound entirely negative. A bit more logic and less sentiment might benefit many in our society. At that moment, Eliza entered the parlor. She had changed into an evening gown of deep blue, her hair arranged elegantly with silver combs. What are we discussing that has everyone looking so serious? Just a medical curiosity, Thomas replied, standing to offer his wife a seat. Nothing to concern yourself with, my dear. Mary watched as her mother sat beside her father on the small sofa. There was something different in the way they interacted, a stiffness that hadn't been there before, as though they were actors who had learned their lines, but not how to make them sound natural. Dinner was announced shortly thereafter, and the family proceeded to the dining room. As they took their customary places, Mary found herself facing the large mirror on the wall. She tried to focus on her plate, on the conversation, on anything but the looking glass that seemed to draw her gaze like a magnet. Eventually, she could resist no longer. She glanced up at the mirror and nearly gasped aloud. The reflection showed the Fairchild family dining as they were, but the expressions were all wrong. Her father's reflection was smiling broadly, something Thomas Fairchild rarely did in reality. Her mother's reflection was gesturing animatedly as she spoke, though the real Eliza sat with hands folded in her lap. William's reflection was eating heartily, while the actual William merely pushed food around his plate. Most disturbing of all was James's reflection. While the real boy sat quietly, looking somewhat anxious, his reflection was grinning mischievously, as though enjoying a private joke. And then there was Mary's own reflection. It was watching the others with an expression of smug satisfaction that made Mary's blood run cold. As if sensing her scrutiny, her reflection's eyes suddenly shifted, meeting Mary's gaze directly. The smile widened into something predatory. Then, slowly and deliberately, the reflection raised a finger to its lips in a shushing gesture. Mary dropped her fork with a clatter. Mary! Her father's voice cut through her horror. What on earth is the matter? With tremendous effort, Mary tore her eyes away from the mirror. Nothing, father. The fork slipped from my fingers. I apologize for the disturbance. When she dared to look at the mirror again, all the reflections were behaving normally, mimicking the movements of their counterparts precisely. A cold sweat broke out across Mary's forehead. She was no longer certain of her own sanity. Had she imagined that terrible moment of disconnect? Or was something far more sinister happening within the walls of Fairchild Manor? The remainder of the meal passed in a blur. Mary barely tasted her food and contributed little to the conversation. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed, or thought she had witnessed. After dinner, the family returned to the parlor. Thomas requested that Mary play the pianoforte, as was often the custom in the evenings. Though her hands were trembling slightly, Mary took her place at the instrument, selecting a piece she knew well enough to play from memory, Mozart's Sonata in C major. As her fingers moved over the keys, Mary became aware of her brother William standing nearby, turning the pages of her sheet music, though she wasn't using it. There was something in his posture, in the way he hovered just a little too close, that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "You missed a note," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "In the third measure. Your reflection would have played it correctly." Mary's hands froze on the keys, the music cutting off abruptly. She looked up at William, searching his face for any sign of the brother she knew. His expression remained bland, his eyes empty of warmth or recognition. "What did you say?" she whispered. "Is something wrong?" Thomas called from his armchair by the fire. "Why have you stopped, Mary?" I'm feeling unwell again, Father," Mary managed to say, rising from the piano bench. "Would you excuse me? I believe I should retire early tonight." Thomas frowned, but nodded. "Very well. Perhaps a good night's rest will restore you." "I'll check on you before I retire," Eliza said, her eyes communicating concern that her words did not. Mary curtsied to her parents and hurried from the room, acutely aware of William's gaze following her. Instead of going directly to her bedroom, however, she slipped into the library, needing a moment to collect her thoughts away from any mirrors. The library was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through the windows. Mary didn't dare light a lamp, fearing it would draw attention. She sank into a chair in the corner furthest from the mirror above the fireplace. "He knows," she whispered to the darkness. "William, or whatever is pretending to be William, knows that I can see the difference." The implications were terrifying. If her suspicions were correct, if these reflections had somehow crossed over and taken the places of her family members, what had happened to the real William, to her father? Were they trapped in the world behind the glass, looking out helplessly as imposters lived their lives? And what about her mother and James? Had they been replaced as well? Eliza had seemed genuine in their conversation earlier, and James had noticed the strange behavior of the mirror in Thomas's study. But what if they, too, had been swapped since then? With growing horror, Mary realized she had no way of knowing who was real and who was a reflection. She couldn't trust anyone in the household. Not until she understood what was happening and how to reverse it. The door to the library opened, causing Mary to shrink further into her corner. A figure entered, a small silhouette that she immediately recognized as James. "Mary," he called softly. "Are you in here?" She hesitated, unsure whether to reveal her presence. If this was truly her brother, he could be an ally, if it was his reflection. "I saw you come in here instead of going upstairs," James continued, moving further into the room. "I had to tell you something important." "What is it?" Mary finally replied, her voice barely audible. James turned toward her voice. "It's about the mirrors. I know I promised to stay away from them, but after dinner, I couldn't help it. I looked in the one in the upstairs hallway, and Mary prompted when he paused. My reflection waved at me, Mary. It waved even though I was standing still. And then it spoke. No sound came out, but I could see its lips moving. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. What was it saying? Could you tell? James nodded, his face ghostly in the moonlight. It was saying, "Help me," over and over. "Help me." Mary rose from her chair and approached her brother cautiously. "James, this is very important. Did you touch the mirror?" "No," James shook his head emphatically. "I remembered what you said about staying away. I ran straight to my room and hid under the covers until I heard everyone go into the parlor after dinner. But Mary, I think something's wrong with Father and William. They don't seem like themselves. I know, Mary said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her brother. I've noticed it, too. Are they sick? James asked, his voice small and frightened. Mary considered how to answer. She didn't want to terrify the boy, but she also needed his help and his vigilance. Not sick exactly, but something has happened to them and we need to be very careful until we figure out how to make things right again. Is it because of the mirrors? Like in those ghost stories Mr. Peterson told me about. Perhaps, Mary said, but not ghosts, James. Something else. She took her brother's hands in hers. They felt warm and solid, reassuringly real. I believe that somehow, at dawn on a recent morning, Father and William's reflections traded places with them. The people we see now are from the world behind the glass. Instead of dismissing this extraordinary claim, James nodded seriously. That makes sense. That's why William doesn't laugh anymore and why Father seems like he's pretending to be Father instead of actually being him. Mary was both relieved and disturbed by how quickly James accepted her theory. Has Mother seemed different to you as well? James thought for a moment. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's like she flickers between being Mother and being someone else. The description was apt, Mary thought. Perhaps Eliza was fighting against the change somehow, resisting her reflections' attempt to take over completely. James, I need you to promise me something else, Mary said urgently. Don't let anyone know that we suspect anything. Act normally around Father and William, and don't look into any mirrors if you can help it, especially at dawn. What about Mother? Be careful even with her, Mary advised. Until we're certain. What are we going to do? James asked, his small face solemn in the dim light. Mary thought quickly. Mother mentioned an old story her grandmother told her about doorways between our world and the mirror world being strongest at dawn. If the reflections came through at dawn, perhaps that's when we can send them back and retrieve our real family. But how? I don't know yet, Mary admitted. But Mother might remember more of the story. I'll try to speak with her privately tomorrow. A sudden noise from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the library. Quick, Mary whispered, pushing James toward a small alcove where historical maps were stored. Hide there and don't make a sound. James obeyed instantly, slipping behind the heavy curtain that separated the alcove from the main room. Mary had just enough time to move away from the hiding place before the library door opened fully and William entered, carrying a lamp. Mary, he said, his voice unnaturally even. Father was concerned when you didn't go directly to your room. It's not like you to be deceptive. Mary forced herself to appear calm, though her heart was pounding. I needed a book to read. I find it helps me sleep when I'm feeling unwell. William's gaze swept the room, lingering on the curtained alcove for a moment before returning to Mary. I see no book in your hands. I hadn't selected one yet, Mary replied, moving toward one of the bookshelves. Perhaps Austen tonight. Pride and Prejudice always soothes me. William set his lamp down on a table and approached Mary, stopping uncomfortably close. You know, don't you? He asked softly. Mary felt her breath catch. Know what, brother? That I'm not your brother, Mary. The thing that looked like William smiled, and the expression was so unlike her real brother's smile that Mary couldn't suppress a shudder. At least, not the brother you've known all your life. I don't know what you mean, Mary insisted, trying to edge away from him. William's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Don't play coy, Mary. I saw the recognition in your eyes at dinner. You're more perceptive than the others. You've been aware of the change almost from the beginning. Let go of me, Mary demanded, trying to pull away. Not yet, William replied, his grip tightening. Not until you understand your position. We've waited too long, planned too carefully, to let one observant girl ruin everything. We? Mary repeated. You and Father's reflection. William nodded, looking almost pleased. among others. The crossing is not easy. It requires preparation, timing. The equinox provided the opportunity we needed, but only for some of us. Others will follow. Why? Mary asked, still struggling to free herself. Why would you want to come here? Because your world is so much more substantial than ours. In the reflection world, everything is muted, diminished. We are the shadows of your existence, always mimicking, never truly living. William's face hardened. We decided it was our turn to be real. By stealing our lives, our identities. Oh, we're not stealing, William corrected her. We're trading. Your family members are living our lives now, experiencing our reality. It's a fair exchange. Mary thought of her real brother trapped in a mirror world, forced to mimic someone else's actions, of her father, a man of agency and authority, reduced to a reflection. The injustice of it filled her with anger. It's not fair at all, she said firmly. And I won't allow it to continue. William laughed, the sound chilling in its emptiness. You can't stop what's already happened. And soon it won't matter anyway. Once we've been here a full lunar cycle, the exchange becomes permanent. Dawn on the 20th of April. That's when our victory will be complete. Mary calculated quickly. The 20th was just 5 days away. And until then, what happens if someone discovers the truth? They won't, William said confidently. Most humans are remarkably unobservant. They see what they expect to see, especially when it comes to those closest to them. Small changes in behavior are attributed to mood or circumstance, not to a fundamental change in identity. And what about me? Mary asked, though she dreaded the answer. Now that I know. William's grip on her wrist finally loosened. That depends on you. You could join us willingly. Your reflection is quite eager to trade places. She finds your life far more interesting than her own. Or you could continue to resist, in which case, he left the threat unspoken, but Mary understood. These reflections were determined to remain in the real world. They would eliminate any obstacle to that goal, including her. I need time to consider, she said, trying to sound uncertain rather than defiant. William studied her face, seeming to weigh her sincerity. Very well, but not too much time. Dawn approaches with each passing hour, sister dear. The endearment sounded wrong on his lips, a mockery of the genuine affection her real brother might express. I understand, Mary said softly. May I go to my room now? I truly am tired. William stepped aside, gesturing toward the door with exaggerated courtesy. By all means, but Mary, no mirrors tonight. Your reflection is becoming quite impatient. The warning sent a chill through her, but Mary nodded and moved past him toward the door. She paused at the threshold, remembering James hidden in the alcove. She couldn't leave him there with this imposter. William, she said, turning back. Would you escort me to my room? I'm feeling rather faint. He raised an eyebrow, but nodded, picking up the lamp and offering his arm. As they left the library together, Mary prayed that James would have the sense to remain hidden until they were gone and then make his way safely back to his own room. The walk to her bedroom seemed interminable, William's arm rigid beneath her hand, his presence beside her a constant reminder of the danger her family faced. When they reached her door, he bowed slightly. Sleep well, sister, he said. Tomorrow we'll continue our discussion. Mary nodded and slipped into her room, closing the door firmly behind her. She listened to William's retreating footsteps, only relaxing slightly when they faded completely. Her first action was to turn the mirror on her dressing table to face the wall. Next, she covered the small wall mirror with a shawl. Only then did she sit on the edge of her bed, her mind racing as she tried to process everything she had learned. 5 days until the exchange became permanent. 5 days to somehow reverse what had happened and rescue her real family from the world behind the glass. It seemed an impossible task, especially since she couldn't be sure who was still genuine and who had been replaced. James was still himself, of that, she was nearly certain. His fear and confusion had been too genuine to fake. And her mother, Mary, wanted desperately to believe that Eliza was still herself, or at least fighting against her reflection's influence. A soft knock at her door made Mary start. "Who is it?" she called, her voice higher than normal. "It's Mother," came Eliza's voice. "May I come in?" Mary hesitated only briefly before moving to unlock the door. Eliza entered quickly, closing the door behind her. "You turned your mirrors," she noted immediately, her gaze taking in the room. "Yes," Mary confirmed, watching her mother's face carefully for any reaction. "After what I saw at dinner, I thought it prudent." "What did you see?" Eliza asked, her expression concerned but not alarmed. Mary described the disturbing scene in the dining room mirror, the mismatched expressions, the independent movements, and especially her own reflection's threatening gesture. Eliza listened without interruption, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When Mary finished, she sank onto the bed, looking suddenly weary. "They've gone further than I realized," she murmured. "And faster." "Mother," Mary sat beside her, hope rising in her chest. "Are you still you?" Eliza turned to her daughter, a sad smile on her lips. "Yes and no. I'm fighting it, Mary. My reflection is trying to take control, as the others have done with your father and William. But I'm resisting as best I can." "How?" Mary asked eagerly. "If you can fight it, perhaps Father and William can too." Eliza shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure. Perhaps it's because I was already familiar with the possibility, thanks to my grandmother's stories. Perhaps it's because I noticed the strange behavior of the mirrors early on and was prepared when my reflection made her attempt." She touched her cameo brooch thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it's this. Your brooch. It was blessed by a priest before my wedding," Eliza explained. "For protection against evil influences," my mother said. "I thought it a quaint superstition at the time, but now," she shrugged slightly, "I find that when I touch it, my thoughts become clearer, more distinctly my own." Mary considered this new information. If blessed objects provide protection, could they also be weapons against these reflections? Perhaps, Eliza agreed. But we would need to act quickly. According to my grandmother's story, once the lunar cycle is complete, 30 days from the equinox, the exchange becomes permanent. "The 20th of April, Mary said. "William, or rather, his reflection, told me the same thing." Eliza looked alarmed. "You confronted him?" "Not intentionally. He found me in the library and revealed himself." Mary hesitated, then added, "James knows as well. He's still himself, but he's noticed the changes in Father and William." "We must be very careful," Eliza warned. "These reflections are determined to remain in our world. They won't hesitate to remove any threat to their plans." "What about the servants?" Mary asked suddenly. "Had their reflections crossed over as well?" "I don't believe so," Eliza said. "The phenomenon seems confined to our family. Perhaps because of the number and quality of mirrors in the house. Or perhaps because we were specifically targeted." "By whom? And why us?" Eliza's expression grew distant. "My grandmother spoke of a hierarchy in the mirror world, reflections of different strengths and ambitions. Some content with their shadowy existence, others desperate for something more tangible." We focused on Mary. "As for why our family, I can only speculate that our position in society makes us attractive targets. The Fairchild name opens doors, provides opportunities that these reflections covet." The explanation made a certain kind of sense, though it still felt like something from a fairy tale rather than reality. Yet Mary could not deny the evidence of her own eyes, nor the testimonies of her mother and brother. "What can we do?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "How do we send these impostors back and retrieve Father and William?" "If my grandmother's stories hold true, there is a way," Eliza said, her voice equally quiet. "At dawn, the same hour when they crossed over, the barrier between worlds is at its thinnest. With the right ritual, the proper words and actions, the exchange can be reversed." Do you remember the ritual? Eliza shook her head regretfully. Not entirely. I know it involves salt, blessed water, and speaking the true names of those trapped on the other side, but the specific procedure. She sighed. I was so young when my grandmother told me these things, and I never imagined they would be more than stories. Mary thought for a moment. Is there anyone who might know? Someone versed in these old beliefs and practices. Perhaps, Eliza said slowly. There's an old woman who lives near the edge of our property. Mabel. She was a slave belonging to the family that owned this land before your father purchased it. Thomas allowed her to remain in her cabin when we took possession. She's known for her knowledge of herbal remedies and other matters. Other matters? Mary repeated. Some call it conjure work, Eliza explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. I don't put stock in such things myself, but she's respected among the local people, both white and colored, for her wisdom and unusual insights. Under normal circumstances, Mary might have dismissed such talk as superstition, but these were not normal circumstances, and she was willing to consider any potential source of help. Could we speak with her tomorrow, perhaps? Eliza nodded. I'll find a reason to visit her cabin, bringing supplies or medicine, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion if, she didn't finish the sentence, but Mary understood if the reflections who had taken over Thomas and William were watching. What about James? Should he come with us? No, Eliza decided after a moment's consideration. One or both of us should remain with him at all times, but involving him directly might put him in greater danger. These reflections seemed to have overlooked him so far, perhaps considering him too young to be a threat. We should keep it that way. Mary agreed. I'll tell him to continue acting normally, especially around Father and William. Eliza stood, smoothing her skirts. I should go before my absence is noticed. Remember to keep your mirrors covered, especially at dawn. And Mary, her voice softened, be strong. We will find a way through this. After her mother left, Mary changed into her nightgown, her movements mechanical as her mind worked furiously to process everything she had learned. The situation was more dire than she had initially feared. But at least now she had allies in her mother and brother, and perhaps soon this woman, Mabel, as well. As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Mary tried to imagine what her real father and brother were experiencing in the mirror world. Were they aware of what had happened? Were they trying to communicate, to find their way back? The thought of them trapped helpless made her heart ache. I'll find a way, she whispered into the darkness. I promise. Despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion eventually claimed her, pulling her into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of mirrors and shadowy figures that moved with unnatural precision. Morning came too soon, grey light filtering through the curtains. Mary woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, checking that the mirrors in her room were still covered. They were, but something else had changed during the night. On her dressing table lay a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there when she went to sleep. Mary approached it cautiously, half expecting it to be some trick of the reflections. When she unfolded the paper, she found a message written in what appeared to be her own handwriting. We are not so different, you and I. I have watched you all your life, mimicking your every move, speaking your words in reverse. Don't you think I deserve a chance to live those experiences for myself? To feel the sun on my skin instead of just its reflection? To taste food instead of merely pantomiming eating? 5 more dawns and your world becomes mine forever. Unless you're willing to take my place. The choice is yours. The message was unsigned, but Mary had no doubt about its author. Her reflection was communicating directly with her now, making her case for the exchange. Mary crumpled the paper in her fist, anger replacing her initial fear. This creature, this shadow self, was trying to justify theft by calling it justice. But there was nothing just about forcing others into a twilight existence while stealing their lives. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mary, came James's voice. Are you awake? Mary quickly tucked the crumpled note into her dresser drawer before opening the door. James stood there in his nightshirt, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes wide with worry. "Did you get back to your room safely last night?" she whispered, pulling him inside and closing the door. He nodded. "After you and William left, I waited a few minutes, then ran straight to my room. I put a chair against the door and covered my mirror with a blanket, just like you did with yours." "Good thinking," Mary praised him. "Did anyone try to enter your room during the night?" "I don't think so," James replied. "But I had strange dreams about the mirror world. It looked like our world, but darker, flatter somehow." Mary felt a chill. Had James somehow glimpsed the place where their father and brother were trapped? What happened in the dream? "I saw Father," James said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He was pounding on a mirror, trying to break through. But no matter how hard he hit it, the glass wouldn't crack. And there was someone standing behind him, watching, someone who looked just like him, but wasn't." The image was disturbing, but it confirmed what Mary already suspected, that their real family members were conscious and aware of their predicament. "James, Mother, and I are going to try to find a way to bring Father and William back," she told him. "But until then, we all need to be very careful. The reflections that have taken their places are dangerous. They won't want to go back to the mirror world." "What should I do?" James asked, his expression solemn beyond his years. "Act normally around them," Mary advised. "Don't give them any reason to think you know the truth. And stay close to Mother or me whenever possible." James nodded, clearly trying to be brave. "I can do that. I'm good at pretending." Mary smiled and ruffled his hair affectionately. "Yes, you are. Now, you should get dressed for breakfast. Remember? Just like any other day." After James left, Mary prepared for the day ahead, selecting a simple morning dress of pale yellow cotton. As she pinned up her hair, she was careful to avoid looking directly at the covered mirrors, fearing what, or who, might be waiting on the other side. Breakfast was a tense affair, though Mary did her best to maintain a facade of normalcy. Thomas and William conversed about plantation business, their manner slightly stiff, but not obviously artificial to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Eliza participated in the conversation with practiced ease, while James focused on his food, occasionally glancing up at Mary as if for reassurance. "I was thinking of visiting old Mabel today," Eliza mentioned casually as the meal was winding down. "I heard from Mrs. Powell that she's been unwell, and I thought I might bring her some broth and medicine." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That's charitable of you, my dear, but hardly necessary. The woman has managed her ailments for decades without our intervention." "Nevertheless, it seems the Christian thing to do," Eliza persisted. "Mary could accompany me. The fresh air would do her good after her indisposition yesterday." Before Thomas could object, William spoke up. "I think that's an excellent idea. Mary and Mother should both get out of the house today." There was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis that made Mary suspect he was eager to have them away from the manor for a time, perhaps to search their rooms or to make plans with the other reflections without fear of being overheard. "Very well," Thomas conceded. "But don't linger too long. That part of the property isn't particularly safe, and I'd rather you be back before midday." "Of course, Thomas," Eliza agreed smoothly. "We'll take just enough time to deliver the supplies and inquire after her health." An hour later, Mary and her mother were walking along a narrow path that led through a wooded area at the edge of the Fairchild property. Eliza carried a basket containing broth, bread, and a small bottle of laudanum for pain. Mary walked beside her, alert for any sign that they were being followed. "Do you think they suspect anything?" Mary asked when they were well away from the house. "Possibly," Eliza replied. The reflections seemed to have some ability to communicate with each other. If William's confrontation with you last night raised concerns, he may have shared them with your father's reflection. That would explain why they were so willing to let us leave the house, Mary realized. They want time to plan their next move. "Which means we must plan ours more carefully," Eliza said. "If Mabel can help us, we'll need to act quickly before the reflections realize what we intend." The path narrowed further, winding between ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Eventually, it opened onto a small clearing where a modest cabin stood. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a small garden of herbs grew along the southern wall. As they approached, the cabin door opened, and an elderly black woman emerged. She was thin, but straight-backed, her white hair covered with a faded bandana. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were clear and penetrating. "Miss Eliza," she called, her voice surprisingly strong. "I've been expecting you." Eliza paused, then continued forward. "Good morning, Mabel. We've brought you some provisions. I heard you've been unwell." Mabel's gaze shifted to Mary, assessing her with an intensity that made the young woman slightly uncomfortable. "Not you that's been unwell," she said cryptically. "But come in, both of you. We got matters to discuss." The interior of the cabin was simple but neat, with a small fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in one corner. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the space with a complex, earthy aroma. There were no mirrors visible anywhere. "You know why we've come," Eliza said. It wasn't a question. Mabel nodded, gesturing for them to sit at the table while she remained standing. "I know. The mirrors have opened their doors, and what was reflection has become flesh. I've been feeling the wrongness for weeks now. Can you help us?" Mary asked directly. "We need to bring my father and brother back from the mirror world." Mabel studied her, head tilted slightly. "You got sight in you, girl. You saw the change when others didn't." "Not soon enough," Mary said, regret coloring her voice. "If I had understood sooner what was happening, no use in that kind of thinking," Mabel interrupted firmly. "What's done is done. Now we focus on what can be undone." "My grandmother told stories about the mirror world," Eliza explained. "About doorways opening at dawn and a ritual that could reverse an exchange, but I don't remember the details." Mabel nodded slowly. "Your grandmama was right. There is a way, but it ain't easy, and it ain't without risk." She moved to a small chest in the corner of the room, opening it and removing several items, a cloth pouch, a small glass bottle filled with clear liquid, and a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. "The reflections aim to stay in your world," Mabel continued as she returned to the table. "Once the lunar cycle completes, 30 days from when they crossed over, the exchange becomes permanent. No power on Earth can reverse it then." "That gives us 5 days," Mary said. "Until the dawn of April 20th. 5 dawns," Mabel corrected. "Each one an opportunity, though the last will be strongest and most dangerous." "What must we do?" Eliza asked. Mabel placed the items she'd gathered on the table between them. "First, you need protection." She opened the cloth pouch, revealing a coarse white substance. "Salt. Pure salt. Blessed under a full moon. It creates a boundary reflections cannot cross." "Like the salt circle in the old tales," Mary murmured. "Exactly so," Mabel confirmed. "This here," she indicated the glass bottle, "is holy water from the church in Mobile. Pastor Jenkins don't know I took it, and best he never finds out." There was a hint of amusement in her voice before it turned serious again. "And these herbs, rowan, St. John's wort, and vervain, they strengthen the barrier between worlds." "And the ritual itself?" Eliza prompted. Mabel's expression grew grave. "That's the difficult part. To call back those who've been taken, you need 3 things. Their true name spoken aloud at dawn, an object they valued in life, something connected to their essence, and a willing sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Mary repeated, alarm evident in her voice. "Not life," Mabel clarified quickly. "But blood. Freely given by one who loves them. Just a few drops, mixed with the holy water and sprinkled on the mirror's surface at the moment of dawn." Mary nodded, relieved. "That seems straightforward enough. We know their names, and we can find personal objects belonging to Father and William." "There's more," Mabel cautioned. "The ritual must be performed before the mirror where the exchange took place, and those who've been replaced must be present." This was a complication. How do we ensure that? Eliza asked. If the reflections suspect what we're attempting, they'll resist. Deception, Mabel said simply. Or constraint, though that path holds more danger. But there's something else you should know. Her gaze was solemn as it moved between the two women. The reflections won't return willingly to their world. They'll fight, using whatever knowledge they've gained from inhabiting your family members. And if they touch you during the ritual, they can pull you into the mirror world in their place. The warning sent a chill through Mary. So even if we succeed in freeing Father and William, we ourselves could become trapped. That's the risk, Mabel confirmed. That's why the salt circle is essential. It creates a boundary they cannot cross, so long as it remains unbroken. Eliza reached for Mary's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. We'll be careful. The important thing is that there is a way to save our family. One more thing, Mabel said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. Not all reflections are the same. Some are merely shadows, mimicking without true awareness. Others have developed consciousness over time, watching the world through the glass, learning, yearning. These are the dangerous ones, the ones who orchestrated this exchange. How can we tell the difference? Mary asked. The eyes, Mabel replied. The conscious ones have a depth to their gaze. A calculation. The others seem flatter somehow. Less present. Mary thought of William's cold, empty eyes and nodded. I've seen it in William especially. Then he's one of the leaders, Mabel said grimly. Be most careful of him. Now, take these. She pushed the items across the table. I've written the ritual words on a paper inside the pouch. Memorize them, then burn the paper. Don't let the reflections find it. As Eliza gathered the items into her basket, Mary had one more question. Mabel, how do you know so much about this? Have you encountered these reflections before? The old woman's face grew distant, as though looking into the past. My grandmother was brought to this land in chains, girl. She carried knowledge from the old country, knowledge about doorways between worlds and creatures that ain't quite human. She taught my mama, and my mama taught me. Her focus returned to Mary. Some doorways should stay closed. When they open, nothing good comes through. They left Mabel's cabin shortly thereafter, promising to return if they needed further guidance. As they walked back toward the manor house, Mary and Eliza discussed their plan in low voices. We need to determine which mirror was the primary doorway, Eliza said. Likely the one in your father's study, the antique French mirror that arrived just before the equinox. And we need personal items, Mary added. Father's pocket watch, perhaps. He's carried it since his own father passed it down to him. And for William, maybe his medical textbook, the one his professor gave him when he began his studies. Good choices, Eliza agreed. Items with emotional significance. As for the timing, should we attempt the ritual tomorrow at dawn, or wait until the final day? Mary considered. Mabel said the final dawn would be strongest, but also most dangerous. If we wait, we risk the reflections discovering our plan or growing stronger in our world. But if we act too hastily and fail, we may not get another chance, Eliza finished the thought. Let's prepare everything, Mary decided. Gather what we need and be ready to perform the ritual tomorrow. If something prevents us, we'll still have for more opportunities before the exchange becomes permanent. Eliza nodded. A wise approach. When we return to the house, we should act as though our visit to Mabel was nothing more than a charitable errand. Go about your normal activities. I'll secure the items we need and hide them in my sewing basket. As the manor came into view, Mary felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. The place that had always represented safety now harbored impostors wearing familiar faces. Yet somewhere inside, perhaps her real father and brother were trying to reach them from behind the glass. We'll succeed, she said softly, as much to convince herself as her mother. We must. The remainder of the day passed with excruciating slowness. Mary forced herself to go through the motions of her usual activities, practicing piano, reading, working on her embroidery. All the while, she felt William's gaze following her, assessing her, looking for signs that she had decided to accept or resist the exchange. By evening, the tension in the house was palpable, at least to those aware of the truth. Thomas seemed more authoritative than usual, issuing commands rather than making requests. William watched everyone with calculating eyes. Eliza moved through her duties with practiced grace, though Mary could see the strain in her mother's smile. And young James, bless him, put on a remarkable performance of childish normalcy, chattering about his lessons and a frog he'd found near the pond. After dinner, as the family gathered,